Well, hello everyone. This is Fadi, and I'd like to welcome you to another special live stream that we're doing from our studios here, just like the one that I did recently a couple of weeks ago with our brother Jay Smith, which, by the way, due to technical difficulties, unfortunately, he couldn't join us. So maybe things will change during the live stream, but for now, we know that he is unable to join us. That doesn't mean that we cannot, proceed and continue with the topic itself. With me here in studio for the first time, our brother Mel from Sneakers Corner. Mel, thank you so much for making time for us, by the way.
Absolutely great to be here, Fadi.
Thank you so much. And of course, everyone, for the benefit of those who are joining us for the first time, this is also another special way for me to do both a video live stream and also an audio live stream for my podcast. So for those of you who are listening to this podcast, I want to welcome you, and I want to start now the podcast, Let Us Reason. Thank you, of course, for joining us. I hear a lot of your feedback from the podcast alone. Wait until you see the videos, of course. We always bring in amazing guests and we talk about fabulous topics. Today's topic is no exception. I intentionally called it, Will the Real Muhammad Please Stand Up? And indeed, for the longest time, we've always heard one side of the story about Muhammad, the founder of Islam, the prophet of Islam, the one who supposedly received revelations about Islam and the Quran from a God by the name Allah. And we know that he was born in 570 AD to the tribe of Quraish in Mecca. And at 621 or so, he migrated north to where we call Medina. And that was the beginning of the Hijra. And from 621/622 until his death in 632, he served also the second part of his ministry in Medina, and he died. And from there, we get the story, the traditional story is that the first caliph was Abu Bakr and collected the Quran for the first time, and then the second caliph was Umar 2 years after that, because Abu Bakr served for 2 years and he died in 632. Then Umar served for at least 12 years, and then we get the third caliph, Uthman, who is responsible for what we call the Uthmanic standard, or at least canonized Quran. However, lately we've been finding there is a lot of holes in these narratives. A lot. Big holes. And everything that we are looking at so far, when I say we, myself here, by bringing in amazing scholars and amazing workers as well, like Dr. Jay Smith, and today, of course, our brother Mel, and the work of Dan Gibson, and many others, we're beginning to see another theme that points north. And today is no exception as well. Once again, I want to welcome everyone to our live stream on Facebook and YouTube. And also I want to welcome our audience who are listening to this podcast, Let Us Reason. So Mel, who is the real Muhammad according to these new discoveries now?
Well, it looks like it's not the Muhammad of the Islamic tradition, and having looked at it for the past 2 years intensively, it seems that the whole story is a fiction, or at least large parts of it. Who I think it is a king in Arabia called Iyas ibn Qabisa al-Tayayi, a member of the Tayayi tribe. Yeah. And so that's where my evidence is pointed to at the moment. It's not, it's not foolproof, but the abundance of evidence points in that direction. And yeah, I'm going to show you some of that evidence today.
And thank you for pointing that out. Again, I want to mention to everyone, we are dealing with newly discovered material, or at least material that hasn't been touched before. Maybe it's been written about somewhere, but no one came forward to try to unpack it the way we are doing it. Now, we understand, and this is to the audience, we understand that today, by the way, we're doing this on December 21st, 2020. Now, tomorrow, something new might come up. Maybe even will actually prove that the standard narrative is correct. We're open for all of that, but we cannot also ignore any of these findings that at least worth examining, and that's why Mel is with us here today. Now, Mel, you mentioned something interesting, the Tayayi tribe, and I've always grown up learning about a certain character out of the Tayayi tribe by the name of Hatim ibn Abdullah al-Tayayi, who is known to be very generous to the point that they tell you one time a guest came to his tent and he couldn't find any sheep or lamb to slaughter, so he slaughtered his horse for him. That's how generous he was. Now, supposedly this Hatim al-Ta'i died 8 years after the birth of Muhammad. And that's it. Muhammad did make reference to him in something called Musnad Ahmad a couple of times, but only talking about him through his daughter, who was a slave after supposedly Muhammad's troop went north to Iraq and captured her, and also fought many of those who are supposedly non-Muslims or traditionally Christians.
Yeah, it's amazing that the Islamic tradition only mentions the Tayayi just that number of times, considering how significant they are. It would be like writing the history of America and forgetting half of the states. That's how big a deal this is. Because the Tayayi, for my reckoning, was the most important force in the 7th century at the time when Islam began. I would go so far as to say that it wasn't the beginnings of Islam, but it was the beginnings of the Tayayi revolution. That's the way I would describe it. The sources refer to the Saracens very often, and occasionally they refer to the Tayayi. But when we gather all the evidence together, and if you look at it in terms of like a Venn diagram, the common factor is that it all seemed to have started way up in the north, not down in the Hijaz as commonly thought. Now,
I'm sorry, Mel. Go ahead. I was going to say, just walk us through your findings. Yeah.
So I went into this assuming that the Islamic tradition was true. I didn't come into it being skeptical at all. It was only when I looked at the sources that I realized actually there's something up here. And the more I digged, the more I found that there was holes in the narrative, as they say. So how about let's look at slide number 1 there. Hope
yes, and everybody can see that slide right now.
Okay, so a common assumption is that Arabia is essentially the same as Saudi Arabia, but it might surprise many that an area in northern Iraq, Syria, and Turkey had been referred to as Arabia a long time ago. Pliny the Elder, for example, in 1st century, refers to Osroene and Commagene as Arabia. Now, I don't know if you can make out where those are, but they are basically where Syria, Turkey, and northern Iraq meet. So it's significant that that was what people thought of when in the 1st century as Arabia. If we move on to the second slide then, we see that in the later part of the 1st century and into the 2nd century really, the Romans then designated 3 different regions as Arabia. So we have the northern part, which was designated as Arabia Petraea. And it was called Petraea after, obviously, Petra.
That's right, yeah.
And then down in the south, we have Arabia Felix, or Happy Arabia. And then in the middle, they termed that large area of Arabia simply Arabia Deserta, abandoned or uninhabited Arabia, for obvious reasons, because it was largely a desert and it didn't have too many occupants in it. So really, if you look at those 3 regions, the most significant really was Arabia Petraea and Arabia Felix. The bit in the middle was a lot of empty space, really, with not a lot of inhabitants. Okay.
Wonderful. And I can see that the scholar you're referring to here is Dr. Robert Kerr, whom I, by the way, had a number of his scholarly articles. So we're not talking just a casual person here, someone with a great reputation in Islamic studies.
Absolutely. And the map that I've used from a paper, I don't remember the name of the paper, but he was talking about the Aramaic underpinning to the Quran. And he spoke at length about the fact that the script that was being used was that of Arabia Petraea. In effect, it was a Nabatean script.
Interesting.
Whereas way down south, the script that was used up to the 6th century was the Sabaic script, which was developed in Yemen.
Yes.
Had they used that script, they wouldn't have had all of these problems with diacritical marks, because the script could carry all the sounds with very distinct letters. So they could have easily avoided a lot of the pain if Islam had began where it said it began, in the Hijaz. So it's an interesting little detail.
Wonderful. I mean, it's amazing. Yeah, I mean, Sabaiyan comes from also the kingdom of Saba down south in Yemen. So, I mean, let's ask the first question. What is the significance of what you just mentioned right now?
Well, the significance is that the story that we're told that that Islam began down in the Hijaz is not backed up by the evidence. So there's so many different levels to this. First of all of the action was happening up in the north, in the buffer zone between the Byzantine west and the Persian east. So that's where it was all happening. What's also significant is the sources that were used in the Quran, you know, various Syriac stories and so on, that is found up there in the north. The words that are used in the Quran as well, the religious vocabulary in particular, are Aramaic in origin. And we have the script, which was developed in the Nabatean region, right, which is the bottom left-hand corner of Arabia Petraea, as you see on the map there. So it's all significant. The political dynamic that was going on was also up there, the conflict between the Ghassanids in the west and the Lakhmids in the east. So it was all happening there. It's a very significant map. And, you know, if we think about the Hijaz was in the middle of nowhere. It wasn't central at that time. It wasn't of any importance. And when we look at the factors that led to the creation of Islam, none of the factors that we find in the evidence can be found in the Hijaz. They're all way up north, and that's the most significant detail.
Interesting. And of course, another significance I picked on is when you say Arabia, that doesn't necessarily mean just what we call today the Arabian Peninsula. It could have been just any of the area that is known as Arabia, technically speaking, which opens the door for the possibility, yes, of things being north or somewhere different, but still in Arabia, technically speaking.
Yes. The people in Arabia Petraea, some of them may have referred to themselves as Aramaic, but some may have referred to themselves still as Arabs. So that identity was there as well. And what we're dealing with here is at least a bilingual population who spoke Aramaic and Arabic, right, though some also spoke Greek as well. And this is something that we need to bear in mind. It's, right, these are very important details.
Excellent. Okay. Do you have anything else to show beside this map?
Okay, so if you go to slide 3. So now we're on to the Tayayi, a very interesting tribe, very interesting group. Their name comes from Tay or Tayayi. In the 2nd century, the Tayayi migrated from the Yemen to the northern Arabian mountain ranges of Jabal Shammar. It was originally called Jabal Tay, after the tribe that went there.
And I'm going to help you with Arabic. Jabal Ta'i, and now it's called Jabal Shammar, whereas there's a huge tribe called Shammar, basically.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if that tribe is connected to the Tayayi. I presume these are descendants from that same tribe.
Interesting.
And notice on the map there, the area in dark brown, that's the old Nabatean kingdom. So when they went up north, they situated themselves just on the doorstep, essentially, of the old Nabatean kingdom. And just as the old Nabatean kingdom was ending, the Tayayi moved up north. So it's very significant. Okay, so we moved on to the next slide then. Right, so in the 6th century then, we have the Fasad War, which split the Tayayi.
Yeah, the Fasad, by the way, is an Arabic word for fitna or for corruption, technically speaking.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is not to be confused with the fitna of the 7th century.
Right, the Umayyad and the Abassids also, correct.
Yeah. So members of its Jadila branch became Christian and migrated to Syria and allied with the Ghassanids, as you can see on the map there in red.
Known as the Ghassasina in Arabic, that's right.
Yeah. And then the Goth branch remained in Jabal Tay, and then the Tayayi also became well established in the Lakhmid region too. So that's the area to the right, which is right on the doorstep to the Sassanids or the Persians.
That's right. So this one is called the Manadhira, Al-Manadhira, which is also another big tribe.
Yeah. So essentially the role that these two populations played here is that of a buffer zone. So the Ghassanids were the fighters essentially on behalf of the Byzantines, whereas the Lakhmids fought on behalf of the Persians. And so they earned a lot of their money from that. And the Tayayi were a subgroup within the population. They were a significant group. And, you know, they did their own thing. They weren't totally subject to the Ghassanids or the Lakhmids. And eventually there came a point where they got a little bit big for their boots in the 7th century. So if we move on to the next slide, which is slide number 5, it's interesting that in the 7th century, Mesopotamia became known as Tashkistan, or land of the Tay. This is very significant. And you can see that in the middle of the map there inside the red oblong.
I mean, we have people that have that last name, Tashkandi, by the way. I mean, it's named after the area.
Wow, yeah. So that area there, as you can see, is between the rivers Euphrates and the river Tigris. Right. And so that's really the center of the action, as we'll see as we go on. So that's where I would place Iyas ibn Kapisa, who I think is the real protagonist.
Now, who mentioned first about Ilyas, by the way? I mean, what source you found this reference to, and why do you think this Ilyas is Muhammad? I mean, I'm just throwing a teaser out there now.
I believe al-Baduri, if I've got his name right, in the 8th or 9th century, and he refers to him. He's also mentioned in al-Tabari. So these are quite late sources. I'm still trying to find much earlier sources, but the way that he is written about in those sources seem to be very straight and historical. But obviously, I'm keen to find earlier references to him.
Wonderful. Okay. And then we'll get to the next question later, maybe in the second half of our live stream, about why do we see a connection between the two characters, basically. Yeah, keep going. I'm sorry.
Okay, so if we turn to slide number 6, this will give you a good idea of the sphere of influence in the 7th century of the Tayayi. So you can see that they had a huge influence in what is essentially Iraq, Syria, and northern Arabia.
Yeah, and this is the Fertile Crescent area, basically.
Absolutely. They knew where it was easy to live. You know, that's the area you want to be because you can grow your crops. You can
exactly.
You can herd your animals. You don't want to be living in the middle of a desert, struggling to survive. So they were smart people, and they knew where the money was.
Right.
So what's interesting here, and it's something to note, is the fact that the Hijaz was outside its area of influence. And this is going to be important because when we look at the earliest sources that refer to Muhammad, they are not referring to the Hijaz, they're referring to the Tayayi, and they're referring to locations inside this red circle. So that's interesting. Wonderful. So these sources that I'm going to be referring to are from the 630s. Okay. And 640s and onwards. You know, these cannot be beaten. You can't get earlier sources than these.
Yeah.
And in my view, the earlier the source, the better.
That's right. And of course, during that time, if we will follow the traditional view, during that time we had what is called the Al-Khulafa al-Rashidun, the rightly guided caliphs, technically speaking. We still don't have the Umayyads or anything like that, if we follow the traditional view.
Yeah, I find that traditional view problematic. I don't see the evidence of caliphs that ruled this entire region at that early stage.
And that's why I'm bringing it up, by the way, because I want you to flush out this tension. Yeah. Yeah,
it's only really with Muawiyah in the I'm going to say in the 660s. That's really when you start to see the first proper caliph who rules both in the western areas and the eastern areas. It's my view that up to that point, what you have is a lot of chieftains in different areas squabbling over their small little patch. You don't really have a transnational leader at that stage. That's my view. And I think the Islamic tradition wants to expunge the record of all of the infighting that went on, and they want to paint these leaders as unifiers and this era as mostly peaceful, when in fact it wasn't anything of the sort.
Yep.
So if we move to slide number 7.
Just to give you a warning, we have about 2 more minutes before we start wrapping up the first half. So just want to help you wrap your thoughts.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. So a very important source for us is Thomas the Presbyter in 640. So the key bit that it says there, and I'll skip the date there, it talks about it happening in 634, 2 years after Muhammad was supposedly dead. There was a battle between the Romans and the Tayayi of Muhammad. And it's interesting that it's spelt with a T at the end. In Palestine, 12 miles east of Gaza. This early source is hugely problematic. First of all, there's everything in that points to the north. The group he's associated with, the location of the event, and to a lesser degree, the source of the information, in other words, where it was written, was also in the north, Mesopotamia. So I think that's a very important source. That source alone destroys Islamic narrative, as far as I'm concerned, because Muhammad was never meant to have reached the Gaza area. He was meant to be a bit like Moses. He saw the promised land but never entered it, and Joshua took over. But as we can see, he was alive and well, according to this early source that's literally only writing a few years after it. Wonderful. If we have time for maybe one more source before we
go ahead. We have at least 2 minutes, but I need to wrap up after that. Go ahead.
Okay, so maybe if we jump to slide number 9. So slide number 9 has a nice map there of the area, and the Hispanic Chronicle of 754 says the Saracens rebelled in 618, the 7th year of the Emperor Heraclius, and appropriated for themselves Syria, Arabia, and Mesopotamia, more through trickery than through the power of their leader Muhammad. Notice that Syria, Arabia, and Mesopotamia are Tayayi areas. This confirms again the link between Muhammad and the Tayayi. For me, this is really solid evidence that Muhammad is located up there in the wrong place, and we can make perfect sense of the rebellion happening in Syria, Mesopotamia, and Arabia if we assume that it was happening in the Tayayi area. So it's all of the evidence is overlapping each other.
Yeah. Thank you, Mel. I want you to hold your thoughts because these are interesting information. I want to just quickly unpack for everybody that we are presenting to you yet again enough evidence that something is happening north. Something is originating from a northern geographical location. And you start putting all these pieces of the puzzle together, and you get what Jay calls, That's exactly what you get. You get something that is fascinating, and we are, speaking of Jay, we'll have Jay right after the break. So I'm going to wrap up this, at least the first part of this podcast of Let Us Reason. If you are joining us live right now on Facebook or YouTube, hang tight. We're going to take like a 1-minute transition to the second part. But all that to say is that you can see why those kind of findings are extremely important. And by the way, I want to give a huge shout out to all of you. We started a campaign to have basically 100 Patreon partners at the end of October. We are short now by 18 only. So thank you so much. We're looking just for more, at least 18 more to join our Patreon team. Thank you again for your love and your support. If you're joining us on the podcast, we look forward to seeing you again, or hopefully you'll hear us again next week because we do this weekly for the podcast. But if you're joining us live right now, please hang tight for 1 minute to transition to the next part. Thank you again. This was the conclusion of our podcast, Let Us Reason, and we will start the second part of Let Us Reason shortly, which for you listening to us on radio will be next week. Thank you again. This is Fadi. God bless. Okay, I think we have Jay. That's what I was told, so that's wonderful.
Yeah, excellent.
And
I hope that came across okay.
Yeah, well, very good. And I think we will continue from there. You want to start with probably the map right after the Hispanic Chronicles?
Yes, I do. Yeah. So the next 3 slides are the end, essentially, of part 1, and then leads naturally into talk about the change of narrative. So So I'm going to be focusing on the Chinese sources in the second half mostly.
Very good. So we have Jay right now, and you guys give me the green light when you want me to start.
How are you, Jay?
Jay, how are you, brother? We cannot hear you yet.
Your audio, Jay.
Yeah, I have no idea who I'm talking to.
Okay, now we can hear you.
Suit and tie. You look awful in a suit and tie. Get back to your t-shirt.
I thought I'd better make an effort.
This is all you need.
So what does the black and yellow represent, Jay? I mean, when you're wearing this shirt.
It represents everything you see here. You notice all my books are black and yellow. They're color-coded. This is what everybody has noticed. I didn't even notice it. People say, hey, you actually match your books behind you. So
yeah,
there I go.
Hey, I mean, why not, man? I'm looking up to you now. I mean, I'm going to have to come up with a new attire.
No, you've got the only one that really fits you. I mean, can you imagine me trying to wear that cloth on my head?
Very good. Are we ready, guys? Okay, they're not ready yet, but are they watching us live right now talking? Yes. Wonderful. You know, everybody can at least enjoy this discussion.
This
Jay,
is the one and only time you'll ever see Mel with a suit and tie, and he only does it for Fadi. He would never
really?
do it for me or anybody else.
We are really honored by this, Mel. Thank you so much for doing this. You know, you didn't have to. You didn't have to.
Just thought about make it professional today, you know, for a change.
We appreciate it. Okay, folks, we are getting ready to start our second part of the live stream. Just to those of you who are watching us, by the way, right now on Facebook and YouTube, we will go for another 24 minutes because this is the start now of our podcast, Let Us Reason. And I want to welcome those of you who are listening to this podcast, Let Us Reason. Last week, of course, you've listened to part 1, where we have our dear brother Mel unpacking for us some findings related to the possible origin of Muhammad, actually from north, versus what we call the standard Islamic narrative, SIN, the standard Islamic narrative that leads or points usually to the south, to the Hijaz region, Mecca and Medina specifically. And I thought Mel did an excellent job, of course, starting with some backgrounds about the tribe where a certain character he's gonna mention later again today, that could be tied to what we know today as the possible character of Muhammad himself. And all the evidence, folks, all the evidence are really intriguing, are really interesting when it comes to looking at all the pieces of the puzzle, when you put it all together, about the Qibla, about Petra, about the origin of Qira'at, about also the coins and many other things. And now we're talking about the character of Muhammad himself, or the person of Muhammad. With that in mind, we have, of course, Dr. Jay Smith with us. We are thankful that the technological issues worked out. Jay, welcome, brother. And we are always excited, of course, to have you, especially when it comes to unpacking these kind of topics. Tell us, Jay, a little bit about your interaction with Mel about this topic, and when did you find out about those kind of discoveries?
Oh, well, the discoveries have been coming through primarily through this last year. I've known Mel for many years. He used to come down to Speaker's Corner. He used to be in the crowd, but he never used to say much when he was in the crowd. It's only now that he's unpacking this material, and he's got to go put together an entire team, not just him. He has a Murad, who is from the Middle East. He has Bala from India. He now has Joe, who is also from Europe. And then they've now got Odon Lafontaine out of France. So these guys, and there's another woman, I can't remember her name, down from Australia.
Hey.
What's her name?
Faye
from Australia. This is a team that has been working together, and they have years and years of experience behind them, but they're only coming now this year in 2020 and starting to unpack what they have been finding. Now, Of course, this is something I've been working on for 25 years, but not with a team around. I'd never had a team like this. And Mel is the one you need to give credit for putting this team together. What they're finding, and this is something that doesn't surprise those of us who've been in this for so long, this idea of everything happening up in the north, up in Petra, in Jordan, coming over here to the east, over in Iraq, in Hira, and what used to be Stesifon, moving up to the north in Edessa and Haran, which is southern Turkey, and then cutting on over further to the east, over to Cairo and places like that. This should not surprise us that almost everything that we see that has made Islam what it is today did not at all come from the south, did not come from Mecca and Medina, did not come from the Hijaz, that central area. Right. It's all derived from up north. But why haven't we looked at that? Why haven't we unpacked that? Why hadn't anybody noticed that? Why is it that this team notices it, we notice it? Well, that's what you're going to find out now. And this is why it's been so helpful having Mel on board to unpack the historical evidence from the 7th and 8th century, not from the 9th and 10th century, back to the 7th century. He's not going to show you source after source after source that pushes this whole narrative from the north and evolves it down to the south. It is going to start moving south. Watch and see what he's going to show you.
Absolutely. And Jay, of course, for the benefit, again, of the discussion that you and I had multiple times, if you can reiterate to people why, while we understand there is a traditional view and we understand the tension between this view and the traditional view, people need to also be open-minded to the fact that there are these findings that keep coming up, or sometimes they're hitting somewhere in a book or research or article and no one really unpacked it. And it's the amazing work of you, your team, Mel and his team, and others like you that are enabling people to at least get a second look towards something that I have to say, folks, if you would have asked me, if Jay would have asked me 5 years ago, do I believe in any of these things? I probably would have been hesitant to say yes. But today, I'm telling you, all these evidence are so compelling that here is what's so interesting about it. Things are falling in place and starting to make more sense, actually, when you put it that way. That's why it is convincing. Now, you know the views of David Wood, of course. We know where Sam Shamoun stands on this. And I respect, of course, where they're coming from. No one is trying to downplay also their pushback. It's always healthy to have pushback from other scholars. Who knows which other scholars also going to come out and write, something like Dr. King, for instance, who wrote something about Dan Gibson's work. We welcome all of that. I mean, we want to have this healthy discussion, but attacking is not going to solve the problem. You have to always come with refutation. And so far, I'm not seeing such strong refutation against these new findings.
Can I just jump in there? Remember, you brought up David King. David King, who attacked Gibson. What was his whole reason? What was his whole thesis for attacking Dan Gibson? Because everything David King was dependent on was from the 9th, 10th, and 11th century. He never went back to the 7th century, and we shut that down. Al-Fadi, you and I shut that down really clearly with the 16 episodes we did on that. Now, the same thing is happening again. The same idea, everything that all the people want to look to define who their Muhammad is and what Islam was, is coming from the 9th, 10th, and 11th century and later. Nothing from the 7th and 8th century. And in all the last 25 years, when I did my first debate in 1995 on this, the one comeback from everybody, not just the Muslims, from all the Western historians was, you're arguing from silence. There's nothing there. You cannot prove it. And the evidence of absence does not mean the absence of evidence. You can see it can be thrown either direction. And that was always a nail in our side. It was always a thorn in our side. So not a nail, a thorn in our side. It's not a nail. In fact, it's gone the other way. We flipped that just in this year. With this evidence that Mel has brought forward, no longer are we not talking from evidence. We are the ones that have the evidence. We have the stones. We have the rock inscriptions. We have the coins. We now have the inscriptions. We have the buildings. We now have the Qiblas. What do they have? What do these people over here from the 9th and 10th century, they're now starting, and they are the ones, the emperors with no clothes on them. Can you see the narrative, the Islamic narrative, this narrative that has been gone, the standard narrative is full of holes, and those holes need to be filled, and they can't fill it. There's nowhere they can go to support this Muhammad, to support this city called Mecca, to support this book called the Quran, to support these people called Muslims, or to support this religion called Islam. Those 5 things, they can't find one piece of evidence for in the 7th century. And what we're finding is an entirely different, we now know who that Muhammad is. It's not the same Muhammad, but it is a 7th century Muhammad, as you've just gone through. And that Ilyas ibn Qabisa, he is actually a guy I would rather follow. That's the Muhammad they should have retained. Why didn't they retain him? Why did they go to this Muhammad? who has all kinds of embarrassing things about him. And that's why David and Sam and Hatun have made a whole ministry out of confronting that Muhammad. Well, I'm not interested in that Muhammad anymore. Throw him away. I want to see what actually happened. I want to see what really went on. I want to go back to the 7th century, and I want history to tell me who this is, because I do that as a Christian with Jesus Christ. If I was going to take the 2nd century view of Jesus, the Gnostic view of Jesus, who was a liar, who was a killer, who actually killed people with his powers, I don't want that Jesus. I want the 1st century Jesus. I want the Jesus who actually walked and talked and ministered. I want to know people who actually knew him. I want people who actually saw him. I want the eyewitness account. I want that Jesus, not the Jesus of the 2nd century. If I'm demanding that of my Christian Jesus, then I should demand that also of the Islamic Muhammad. And that's why what Mel is doing, what his team has found, has been absolutely ground shaking. It's earth shattering. The fact that they're coming up with now material from this century, the very century when this man supposedly lived, and found that almost everything we've heard about this man is fraudulent. Well, why shouldn't it be? Why is that surprises? If the same thing has happened with almost every great historical character. You look at all the great myths about the legends about, take the legend that we know of, what's his name, King Arthur. Take a look at that Arthurian legend. Is much of it true? Look at Macbeth. Do you know if anything about Macbeth? Macbeth is true. Yet these are great historical characters that people have written yarns and huge stories about. But take a look and see, when you go back and ask the century they supposedly lived, there's nothing about them that matches the legends and the myths that have grown about them. And this is why we need to ask every Muslim that's watching, why is it that everything you're dependent on is 200 to 300 years later, does not match anything we can find in the 7th century? You are nothing. You are following a man that's nothing more than a myth and a legend.
All right. Well, we want to welcome Murad. Looks like Murad is also on the comments section. Murad, thank you so much for joining us. We are definitely working on putting together a panel discussion where I would like to bring you in, hopefully in January. So don't feel left out. It was just a last-minute decision here to be made. But thank you so much for the amazing work you're doing. Of course, as Mel and Jay made reference to the work you're doing. Well, Mel, we're going to turn it over to you before Jay steals the show. So go ahead and continue.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I do want to credit Murad for a lot of help in terms of development of my ideas, particularly with the idea of the Iraqi thesis and my understanding of the Tayayi. So thank you, Murad. So we're on to slide 10. And this is significant. The Tayayi were split during the first fitna, with those in Syria supporting Muawiyah, and those based in Arabia and Iraq supporting Ali, as you can see there on the map. And what's interesting is a branch of the Tay led by Qutbah ibn Shabib were among the leaders of the Abassid revolution, which toppled the Umayyads in the mid-8th century. So, the Tayayi, they may split, they may have their divisions, but ultimately it's members of the Tayayi that have the power. And that's the true story, really, of what happened.
Yes, and this is, by the way, it's a fight between Al-Manadhira, that's a tribe, against Muawiyah and the founders of the Umayyad, basically. Absolutely.
Yeah. So if you turn to the next slide, then this leads us into Iyas. We have an interesting source from Sebius from the 660s. So who was the most likely candidate referred to by Sebius as Mehmed? So I've just taken 3 quotes from it. So they, the Jews expelled from Edessa, departed, taking the road through the desert to Tashkistan, Arabia, to the sons of Ishmael. We saw earlier where Tashkistan is, so that's significant. And then it says, in that period, a certain one of them, a man of the sons of Ishmael, named Mehmed, became prominent. Because the command had come from on high, he ordered them all to assemble together and to unite in faith. Now, I would suggest to you, the only sort of person who could order a large group of people to assemble together and unite would be someone on the level of a king. So this led me to inquire, well, who was the king at that time? And what we find is that Iyas ibn Qabisa had been selected to become king of the Lakhmid area by the Persians in 602. And his reign ended in 617. And why is that significant? Because the rebellion by the Tayayi happened the following year. And I would suggest that it was he who led this rebellion and took on that name Muhammad. Okay.
Now, let me ask you this question, Mel. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is there a connection between this now that you mentioned, this rebellion, and why we have the Hijra, the Islamic calendar, starting usually at the last 10 years versus the entire time Muhammad served? Is there any connection between the Islamic calendar and something like that, for instance? I'm just curious, that's all.
Yeah, it's my reckoning that, when Sebius here talks about this Muhammad uniting them together, I would suggest that what he did was he united all of the tribes, the clans, in 622, and that's the significant
interesting
moment in the story. And Jay will remember me saying that in an earlier episode with him that I believed that what happened next, when he rebelled against the Persians, he eventually had to retreat westwards, because obviously you can't just take on the Persian Empire and expect to survive it straight off. And I thought that this is where it connects with Petra, that he went westward to Petra. Now, what's interesting, just a few days ago, so this is literally hot off the press. If you turn to slide 12, I found this in a Jewish source, which is called the Pesikta Rabbati. This was put together in the 9th century, but it was different Jewish discourses from the previous decades, as far back as even the 630s. And what's interesting, it confirms this hunch that I had, which you see in the red box. It says the king of Persia will make war against the king of Arabia, and this king of Arabia will go to Edom to take counsel from the Edomites. There we have it. So Iyas ibn Qabisa, he was a king in Arabia, essentially, as we mentioned in the very first slide. This area had been referred to in the 1st century as Arabia. In fact, it was still referred to as Arabia Petraea. And where are the Edomites? Well, that's where Petra is. Edom and Petra, same area.
Right. Again, I mean, it's what a coincidence, right? What a coincidence. I mean, it's just amazing how all these things are falling in place right now. We have about 10 minutes for the podcast side to end. Of course, we'll continue our discussion, but I want to give Jay a moment here if you want to comment on anything. You're muted.
I think I'll let Mel continue because he has an awful lot yet to go through.
Very good. Go ahead, Mel. Continue.
Okay, so if we turn to slide 13 then. This is the key thing. The changing of the guards requires changing of the narrative. And so what I would refer to is that there was an old narrative and a new narrative. The old narrative is the Northern Historical Story, or NHS. The Southern narrative is the SIN, the Southern Islamic Narrative, and there is an overlap there. And I believe that the new narrative began in the 680s, and then with the advent of the Abassids in the 750s, the old narrative died out. Elements of it continued for some time, perhaps in local areas, but eventually the Southern narrative became the most dominant one, and the rest was forgotten. And there was an effort by the Abassids to get rid of that old narrative.
I think this went right over the head of everybody listening. They had no idea the joke that you just gave. Did you understand that, Al-Fadi?
Yeah, so I was going to say, if you can unpack this portion, and why do you think there's a push to take things backward?
No, he's missed out on what the NHS signifies. The NHS is the National Health Service. He put that in there intentionally for all our British friends and all those who are dependent on it. That's what heals you. That's the Northern historical story. And he's put SIN, sin, as the Southern Islamic narrative.
The sin caught my attention for sure.
I just wanted to make sure, because a lot of people went right over their heads. They didn't pick up on the joke that he's put in there. Great, well done, Mel.
Yeah.
Cheers. So I hope you get the idea that that there was an old narrative, and the sources that we saw in the 7th century would line up pretty well with the Northern historical narrative or story, and that has been got rid of. All we have are just elements of sources and so on, and we're trying to piece together and restore that narrative essentially, because that original narrative would have been a more truthful and honest narrative, but if you are the Abassids and you want to justify why you should be ruling, you have to create a narrative to justify that. It's just plain propaganda. So you have to big up your position within the Tayayi, and so therefore you point out that the Quraish were the really important group within the Tayayi, and that's really the reasoning behind it.
Got it. So it's a connection to a certain tribe and a certain geographical area for that tribe. Yeah, keep going, no problem.
Okay, so if we turn to slide 14 then, I'm going to be looking for the rest of our program at the Chinese sources. And this is the smoking gun, because we're going to see how the narrative changed in real time. Now, this source here was from an envoy that was sent to China from the Tayayi. So this is straight from the horse's mouth, as it were. So they arrived in the Chinese court in 651 at the Tang royal court. And the envoys told us that their king's surname was Dashi, or Tayayi, as it's rendered. So if we turn to the next slide then, number 15, this is what it says. Dashi situates in the west of Persia. During the year of Tayayi of Su dynasty, there was a Persian man herding camels in the mountain of Jufin Modina. One day, a lineman, which I think is a reference to nowhere, telling him, there are 3 caves on the west side of Jufin Modina mountain. A large amount of weapons is stored inside the caves, and you can go and retrieve them there. There is also a black stone with text carved on it. You will become the king if you read and do what the carved text on the black stone tells you. Now, what's really significant here is the protagonist here is a Persian man. He's not an Arab. So, we all think Muhammad is an Arab, but this source coming straight from the Tayayi is telling us that the instigator of all of this was a Persian, right? And you can see the black stone is making an appearance as well. Now, what seems to be going on is that Khosrow has asked Iyas ibn Kapisa to go and retrieve these weapons stored in weapons dumps in the Lakhmid area, because the Lakhmids in 602 are beginning to get a bit rebellious. So he wants this store of weapons brought into the Persian area. So Iyas was given that job. He must have been successful because he was appointed. Now, what's interesting, and I haven't got time to show today, but this story appears in Al-Tabari, and the person who is mentioned as the Persian man in this story is Iyas ibn Kapisa.
Interesting.
With pretty much the same details.
Right.
He's told, go and retrieve the weapons and you will become king. So that's an interesting detail of that would justify me saying that Iyas was Muhammad.
I see. By the way, we have about 3 minutes left for the podcast. So if you want to, we're going to continue anyway after that, but just to help you at least wrap up your thoughts maybe.
Okay. So on slide 16, I'm not going to read all of it there, but it says that this person, the Persian, set up a separatist regime in the western part of Sassanid empires. Now, I'm taking it directly from Robert Hoyland's. I think that might be a typo. It should be Sassanid Empire there. So it's interesting that it's clearly pointing to the beginning of what I call the Tayayi revolution, and it's a Persian that's the instigator. If we turn to slide 17, in another Chinese source, again referring to the earlier narrative, we see that it says that in the beginning there was a Persian who supposedly had the help of a spirit, i.e. a ghost, which I think means a white man, in obtaining edge weapons which he killed people, subsequently calling for all the Persians to become his followers. This is absolutely explosive stuff, as you can see. This completely demolishes the Islamic narrative, because the Islamic narrative would have us believe that the protagonist at the beginning of all of this was an Arab, and that he was a rags to riches type guy. He was just a little orphan, but what we can see here, this story is much more realistic. We have a guy who had experience as being a king. He used that experience to rebel against the Persians. He knew how to lead armies. He knew how to run logistics and fight a campaign. And as we if we think back to Sebius refers to the fact that Muhammad was a strategist when it came to war. So this all ties together that Iyas is the likely person who was Muhammad.
And go ahead, Jay. We have like a minute and a half. Go ahead.
Real quickly, Modena, that is the Chinese way of saying Muhammad. So that's why you need to look, the Tayayi, that's Da'i, that's the Chinese way. And why is this important? What Mel has found, and this is something that it must not be lost on the listeners, the fact that these are coming from Chinese sources who have therefore nothing invested in the story. They have no bias. They're talking as outside and neutral observers. The fact that they're pointing these out, the fact that they are pointing to Muhammad, the fact that they are pointing to him being a Persian, everything we have had so far is coming from the traditional sources, which are Abassid, who have all kinds of bias. So that's why this is even more powerful, that we're now picking these up, coming out of a neutral environment.
Wonderful. Yeah, good point. And of course, I want to point to people the fact that Muhammad's name didn't appear in a Shahada until later. There is something interesting to be said about that. Go ahead, Mel. I give you the last word.
Yeah, I just wanted to just correct Jay there. It mentions Modena there, but it's in the next source that I will look at, where it actually refers to Mokomo, which is Muhammad.
Oh, I'm sorry. So it's Mokomo. It's not Modena.
So it's in the next one. Yeah.
Very good. So we're wrapping up our second part, which is the podcast. But everyone on the live stream, please stay basically, tuned. Don't go anywhere. We are coming back to continue with our live discussion. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us in this podcast, Let Us Reason. As always, we encourage you, of course, to subscribe to our YouTube channel, CIRA International, where you can also listen to this podcast and all of the previous 6 years of that radio show. For the rest of you, of course, stay tight. Hang in there. We will be back in just maybe less than a minute, and we will continue with our live discussion about this interesting topic related to who is the real Muhammad and how does that tie into the traditional narrative versus the tension that we are uncovering right now and unpacking about other findings that contradict that traditional narrative. As always, thank you so much, Mel, and thank you so much, Dr. J. And please, don't go away, everyone. We will continue with our discussion. This is Al-Fadi. Thank you so much. God bless. Okay, everyone. So we're back again to our live show. So, Mel, continue. I mean, you have, a couple of slides left if you want to discuss those as well.
Yeah, so what's interesting is that the envoys from the Tayayi they went to China on several dates all the way up to the middle of the 8th century, and their story was consistent. It was the old narrative. But then suddenly, in the late 750s, the Chinese government of the time noticed that the story had changed. So if you go to slide 18, there, slide 18. So this is taken from Robert. The Tang government noticed something odd when they received envoys during the years of ZJ, 756 to 758.
You were cut off when you said Robert Hoyland, right? That's what you're referring to?
Yes, Robert Hoyland.
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
They were told a completely different story of how the Dashi were founded. This time, Muhammad's name appears, and the story this time is like the Sen we have today, the standard Islamic narrative, or the Southern Islamic narrative, as I would term it. The Chinese were confused, so they decided to record both story versions. So this is the smoking gun that shows us that, we're not conspiracy theorists. There is actually solid evidence to show that there was a change of story. We have the old story, and now we have the new story. And I'd be really excited to share with you what that source tells us, this new story. So if we turn to slide 19, and first of all, we will see traces of the old northern narrative in it, but now the Quraish and Muhammad are central. So it goes. Another saying is the ruling clan of the Dashi, or Tayayi tribe, is called Guli, or Quraish. During the year of Kai Huang, 581 AD to 600 AD of Su dynasty. Now that year may be may be wrong there, but there are two families within the Guli tribe. One family is called Beni Shishan, or the Banu Hashim, and the other is called the Beni Mohuan, or the Banu Marwan. There was a man from Beni Shishan called Mokimo, or Muhammad, who was very brave and wise and was hailed as a king by the tribe people. Notice we have Muhammad being referred to as a king.
Right.
The king Mokimo then expanded the kingdom's territory, stretching across 3,000 leagues from east to west with his mighty forces. He also conquered the city of, I think it's pronounced Shia, Syria, which is called City Shan, or Damascus. Now, I think this is incredible. When we join up the old Chinese sources with the new ones, we now have a name given for the Persian who started it all off, which is Muhammad, which we believe is a title that he was given. So this is quite incredible.
And this is something you said that Dr. Hoyland made reference to.
Yes. Well, Dr. Hoyland just simply in his book, Seeing Islam as Others See It, he makes reference to the fact that the Chinese were puzzled by the change in story and then just put down the two versions. Now, obviously, I haven't got access to that original passage that he read where the Chinese expressed their confusion. So I'm telling you secondhand, but even without that, it's pretty obvious when we compare the old source and the new source that there's a change of narrative happening.
What Mel's referring to here, you have envoy after envoy that's going up in 705, another one that goes in 711, another one that goes in 741. What they're bringing back, the stories they're bringing back from this Persian area, suddenly changes between 756 and 758. And that's when this new person that he's referring, this Mokimo. Now, look at the dates. Who comes in between 741 and 756? It's the Abassids who come in. What do? The first thing they do is they take the capital away from Damascus and they bring it down to what is now Baghdad.
That's right.
Ctesiphon before.
Yeah.
So they now are eradicating that earlier narrative, the Umayyad narrative, and they're bringing their new narrative. What's fascinating and what Mel's bringing up here is the Chinese are noticing this because these are reports from their envoys that have been coming systematically roughly every 10 years. And now they come up with a whole new narrative, and it's referring to these Quraish. Who is these new people called the Quraish? This is a new introduced people. Well, we know the Quraish are the people from Mecca and Medina. Well, that didn't exist in the earlier envoys reports. Who is this new man, Mokimo? Well, he was not in any of the earlier reports. If Muhammad had been the one that started the whole thing, he should have been riddled with references to him. That's why I think this is fascinating what Mel has come across. He's come across from a completely neutral environment, one that's far enough away, would have no agenda and there's no reason for them to lie about this or to create something or to make it up. They're just observing what they see and having these periodic envoys going in and out and coming back with the reports. Brilliant.
That's right.
Okay, so if we turn to slide 20 then, just to see the remainder of the source. So the Tayayi told the Chinese that the founders of their empire were Persians, not Arabs, and this is key. It says there were 11 Persians who came, and according to their rank as Mushu, were transformed into kings. After this, the masses gradually gave their allegiance, and subsequently Persia was extinguished, and Byzantium, Fulin, as it's described in Chinese, was crushed. When the original king had died, his office passed to the first Mushu, and now the king was the third Mushu. The royal surname is Dashi. Now it's interesting. I don't know if it's when it talks about the 11 Persians, whether Muhammad is included in that or that's in addition. It's hard to know. But what's interesting, if you look at Banu Quraish, this subgroup of the Tayayi, one possible meaning of Banu Quraish is sons of Cyrus. Quraish can mean
that's right.
Cyrus.
That's right, yeah. And
Cyrus came from where?
Quraysh, yeah, that's right. In Arabic, Quraysh is Cyrus, and he's from Persia. He's the king of Persia.
From Persia.
Yeah.
So this group, this elite group, likely were connected in some way. They were in some way politically aligned to his memory. Perhaps some of them were even descendants from him. It's hard to know, but they certainly had ambitions in that respect. They wanted to build an empire like Cyrus. And so what's also interesting is the fact that now that the Tayayi have split and it's their group that are in charge, they don't want to give credit to the Tayayi anymore. Right. So the Tayayi are scrubbed from the memory, and the group that's really important is the Quraish.
That's right. That's right.
And so what happens then?
I just want to make a quick comment, Mel. Moderators, H2O needs to take a water break. You know what that means. Keep going. Yeah.
What was I going to say? I forgot what I was about to say there.
Talking about Quraish here.
Yeah. So so in the 750 or sorry the 850s we're talking, which is it? 750s. Sorry. In the 750s, you can see now the beginnings of this new narrative. The problem is, how do you get rid of the Tayayi? Because everyone knows the Tayayi is way up in the north. Everyone is familiar with that. So the way to get around that is to move everything way down south. So by moving the story to the south, you start with a blank slate, and then you can create a fictional narrative around the Quraysh and how Muhammad was now an Arab, and the Quraysh were his tribe. Do you see how things are being twisted?
Right.
Can I just interject right there? This is where I would go with Dan Gibson's. This is where Gibson's material actually jives with what Mel's saying here. They didn't create a complete new slate. I think of Gibson, if you look what Gibson's saying, is that you have this battle happening within the Umayyads itself. And this is started from 687 when you had Zubair, who rebels against Abd al-Malik, who is the emperor at that time. He is he is in charge of Petra. He destroys the city, destroys the Kaaba, and takes the black stone with him. Now, we haven't said much about the black stone here, but we're going to be doing an awful lot of studies on the black stone. This black stone, has antecedents all the way back to the 2nd century. Elagabalus, the Roman, who is the one that controls the black stone, gave the idea that wherever the black stone is, God's presence follows it. So the black stone includes or incorporates God's presence. So when Zubair takes the stone with him out of Petra down to the south, he then goes to where is the Hijaz. As he takes that presence down with him, the pilgrims start to follow him rather than go to Petra anymore. So it is not a blank slate. That already existed since the 680s. Now we're up into the 750s. This has been going on for about 70 years by this time. By that time, Mecca then was being created. Remember what Gibson says. Take a look at Mecca today, and you will see it's nothing more than a reproduction of the original Mecca, which was in Petra. It's just on a smaller form. Like the Safa and Marwa mountains, those aren't mountains. They're nothing more than rocks, 15 feet high. That's a facsimile of what was earlier. But now that you have the black stone with you, it doesn't really matter because God's presence is with you. So it's not that they're making a new slate. They have already incorporated it. All the pilgrims are now coming that way. The Abbasids are really excited about this because now they can thumb their nose at the Umayyads. But now you've got to put body to it. You've got to put a history to it. And that's why Ibn Ishaq writes his first history in 756. Notice we don't have Ibn Ishaq's history. We don't have his biography of this man. Why don't we have the biography of this man? Well, back to you, Mel.
I would suggest the reason is because there was obviously a lot of holes in that first attempt.
There you go.
Of the narrative. There was too many problems. How do you make everything fit? It takes a lot of minds to make a convincing story.
And it takes a lot of time. And that's why we don't have Ibn Ishaq, we have Ibn Hisham. That's 70 years later. It takes them 70 years to finally get the biography together. But remember, it's not coming out of ex nihilo. It is coming out of a place, and it's all coming out of an event. Now they've got to create the man, and then of course the book follows. Look and see when all the Qurans start to appear. That's a whole nother thing we haven't even got into.
Yes, and that's why we're excited, of course, about this. And I really mean it that we would like to start, a panel discussion in a live stream once a month, starting in January. But when me and Jay are here in studio, we would like to bring you and Murad and the others as well, because to give updates, of course, we know things are moving so fast and so quickly. But at the same time, to continue to unpack this, again, I want to reiterate for everybody, the reason why this is intriguing to someone like me who come from a background of the traditional view is that all the pieces are starting to fall in place, and there is some, let's call them peculiarities that cannot be explained unless you begin to look at it this way, meaning the northern tradition versus the southern tradition. Northern tradition, you begin to see things making sense. Why do we have a late CIRA? Why do we have a Qibla that was facing that direction 200 years, before the so-called traditional direction of Qibla? Why do we have stories coming from north? This is the first time really I connected the dots between the sons of Quraish and Quraish. Makes sense. I mean, wow, what a coincidence, So all of these things are extremely important for us to pay attention to. Now, Jay, I was telling Mill before we started the show that the Tayayi tribe in general has a character by the name of Hatim ibn Abdullah al-Ta'i, who is well known supposedly for his generosity, and supposedly he died 8 years after the birth of Muhammad, if we take the traditional dates, of course. Now, I went digging and I found out that Muhammad made reference to him in 2 or 3 hadiths, according to Musnad Ahmad, which is a later hadith collection anyway. So that's kind of interesting, really. We would like maybe to unpack that at some point. Not that I'm saying Hatim is Muhammad, but what I'm saying, it's interesting that tribe is mentioned only in the aspect of Hatim al-Ta'i, nothing beyond that, of course, generally speaking. Can we take some questions if we see any, by the way? I want to thank those who are giving through Super Chat, by the way. So we have a question here. Is this live or replay? Yeah, definitely. I tell you what, this is a replay done in a live way. I mean, that's how miraculous we are. I need real questions, folks. So if we can see any questions, we would like to ask. So let me ask this question. Will these slides, by the way, be available at some point for people? The ones that at least we've developed so far. And if they are, where can people find them, of course? I mean, you have your own channel, Sneakers Corner. Jay, you have your own channel. Is this something you want people to have access to? If so, where can they go and get it?
Well, for me personally, I will probably create PDFs of them and create a website so that people can download them.
That'll be great. Let us know when that happens and we'll announce it for you, for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely.
We'll probably be putting all this up on the Fander website, which is coming out in January.
Very good, very good. Now, Jay, anything you want to add to this? I mean, we're still doing the live here. Anything interesting that you feel like time just ran out and we didn't address yet, related to this topic, of course?
Okay, if you're looking at the north to south divide, if you want to look at, I would say it's not a divide. I would say it's an evolution from north to south. It's moving from the north up down to the south. We have talked about, the material that Mel has really introduced in this segment is the Chinese paradigm, the Chinese narrative, which is absolutely important. There are many other things we can look at. Take a look at the Arabic. The Arabic that we see in the Quran today. The Arabic that we see in the Quran today is from the north. It's from Petra. It's Nabatean Aramaic. The Tar Marbuta, the Alif Maksura, the Al, which is the word for the in Arabic. It does not exist in the central part of Arabia. That Arabic that's from the central part of Arabia from the 7th century is Sabaic. Sabaic Arabic is from Yemen. That is way down, and what is today, well, you can see, look on a map. That's what it is today. The ancient name would have been Hadramat. I have to keep on saying that because people keep on thinking, I don't know what I'm talking about when I use modern names. I use those modern names so you can all understand where I'm talking about on a map. Now, what's fascinating is the Arabic that's in our Quran that we use today, and including all the Qira'at. Look at the Qira'at that we've been talking about over this last year. Those Qira'at are all Northern Arabic. It is not Southern Arabic. It is not Central Arabian Arabic. It is from either Petra, or as we're now finding out, it's Nabatean Aramaic, which then spread right across over to the east, over to places like Hira and Ctesiphon, and further over to what is today Iran, and then further north up to Damascus. It didn't go south. The trade line, look at all the trade routes. Remember the trade route theory put out by Dr. Montgomery Watt in the last century. Look at the trade routes. All the trade were centered in Petra. They went east and south, and they went north. No trade went south. If Mecca or Medina was the center of the trade, as Montgomery Watt used to say, and Patricia Crone just destroyed the trade route theory in 1987 with her book called Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam, there was no trade for their going through Mecca Medina for one very good reason. There was no Mecca, not that early. What's more, take a look at all the discussions that we have in the Quran. Just open up a Quran and look at all the theological discussions that are there. They primarily confront the Jews, they confront the Christians, they confront the divinity of Jesus, they confront that chapter 4, verse 157. Look at all these theological disputes that were happening between Jews and Christians, who are referred to and named over and over again. There were no Jews living in Mecca and Medina in the 7th century. Robert Hoyland has made that very clear in his book. There is no reference to any Jews that far south. The furthest south you're going to get to is Medina and Saleh, which is northwest of Yathrib, which is the archaic name is what is today Medina.
You make a good point.
So all of this, you could not have even a Quran put together that far south and have these kind of discussions that far south. Now, this was brought up in 1977 by Dr. John Wansborough. He brought this up. He was head of department at School of Oriental and African Studies. We're talking about 50 to 60 years ago, he brought this up, and nobody has paid attention. He got a death threat for bringing this up, and he said, you can't have this kind of material in the Quran that far south, because there was no one there to discuss it. There were these discussions. These are debates that are going on in the Quran, and they're debating actually theological debates that only would have appeared, and look where they would appear. They would only appear in a place like Hira. And why Hira, which is today Kufa? Because that's where the seminaries were. That's where the Christian and Jewish seminaries were. Then you can only have debates with other theologians, but that is way up in Iraq, next to just southwest of what is today Baghdad. So can you see everything we're looking at is coming from the north to the south? Take a look at Gibson's material, all of his work on the Qiblas. Look and see where all the Qiblas are facing. There are no Qiblas facing Mecca at all, not till 727. All the Qiblas were either facing, up till 706, are facing the north again. They're all facing Petra, uniquely Petra, from as far away as China and also Guangzhou in India, Gantan in China, Guangzhou in India, Guangzhou in China, and Sherman in India. Also from the north, from Turkey, even from the south, from the Hadramaut, they're all facing Petra. Why is it that all of this is facing the north? Because that's where everything was happening. That's where the trade was. That's where the people lived. The only people that lived in the central part of Arabia were pretty much nomadic.
Yep.
They would not have any superstructures. There would be not any big cities there. You cannot have the laws. Look at the institutions that you see in Sharia law. Notice that Sharia law is introduced in the 9th century. It's introduced with Shafi in 820. After Shafi comes Maliki. Then you have Maliki, Shafi. I can't think the other two schools.
Hanafi and Hanbali.
Hanafi and Hanafi and
Hanbali.
Maliki, Shafi, Hanbali. Those all come after 820. That is the 9th century again. And take a look and see where those laws are. Almost every one of those laws are Roman laws. Dr. Patricia Crone wrote about this. These are all, again, this would have only have had, they would have even known about these laws had they had interaction with the Byzantines. The Byzantines are up in the north again. So everything we're looking at comes from the north. And that's why what Mel has come on, he is saying, listen, if it's all coming from the north, then why am I surprised that almost all the artifacts, look at the rock inscriptions, 30,000 rock inscriptions, none of them from the south, none of them from the Hadramaut. They're all from what is today Syria and Israel and Jordan. And if that is the case, if you look and see the kind of Arabic they use on those rock inscriptions, it's this Nabatean Aramaic again. Look at the coins. All the coins, look and see where the mints are, where the coins are created. They're created either in Syria in the west, or they're created in Iran in the east. Why does that not surprise us suddenly? And look and see what's on the coins. Always on the coins in the west, they're either Christian coins in the west, or there's Zoroastrian coins in the east. Nothing whatsoever to do with Islam. Yep. So here, all evidence after evidence after evidence, we're now supporting and showing that when it's after a while, it becomes a no-brainer. You have nothing that would make sense of any empire that's created by a man named Muhammad, then continued by people named Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali. We can't find any reference to those four characters as caliphs at all. Oh, their names are very popular, so you will see their names, but not as kings, not as rulers. And that's why you need to ask, why is it we have always assumed that the Abu Bakr, followed by Umar, Uthman, and Ali, are historical? Because everything we have assumed has come from these traditions, again, in the 9th and 10th century. I'm sounding like a broken record. I'm sorry for sounding like a broken record. But the evidence that we're looking at when it comes to the inscriptions, when it comes to the coins, when it comes to the buildings, when it comes to even the Arabic, when it comes also for the trade routes, all these different aspects, one after the other, when it comes to the Qiblas and the mosque, they all point north. So when did it come south? Well, Mel has given us the answer today. It
That's
started moving south because of the Abbasid need. They needed to distinguish themselves, to eradicate themselves from the Umayyads, and to take that way, to get rid of any reference to the Tayayi. And unfortunately, the Chinese kept on that reference for us. And so that's why they started the new narrative. But their new narrative was not new. What did not start immediately. It had to be tweaked and tweaked and tweaked over 70 years of tweaking. So by the time Ibn Ishaq writes it down, you finally get Ibn Ishaq putting it together in 833.
That's wonderful, Jay. Mel, I want to give you last word here because when I look at a couple of questions real quickly before we wrap up.
Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to clarify in terms of the 30,000 rock inscriptions. It's not that there weren't any rock inscriptions way down south. It's that there was no reference to Muhammad or to Islam or anything remotely similar to the Islamic tradition. So,
okay, let me just say one thing. Ilinstad, if you look at his material, he doesn't say there's any from Mecca, Medina. When he says the ones that are down south, he's talking about way down south in the Hadramat. So that's not the mental part. So yeah, of course there's an enormous happening in the Hadramat, but not from Mecca and Medina, not from what we know as the Hijaz.
One quick question, and that's for you, Jay. You can just give him the zinger type of answer. Folks, if you can slow down a little bit, I want to look at the question from Buzzy Jones. I think it's a little bit up here. Question is about where did the qira'at come from? And I think you did a number of videos yourself, in addition to us. We'll be releasing the videos in January, the qira'at conundrum. But go ahead and elaborate further on this, maybe in 1 minute, about the northern connection also with the qira'at.
Buzzy, thank you so much. When you take a look at the qira'at, all the qira'ats, the earliest qira'ats begin to form in Damascus and in Kufa. Of the 30 qira'ats that have now been finally appointed in the 15th century, remember, we're talking about 1429, that's 15th century, that's 800 years after Muhammad. When they put these 30, they chose these 30 out of hundreds, these 30 were chosen. 22 of them are from Basra, from Kufa, from Damascus. Only 8 of them are from Mecca and Medina, and those we're not even sure are from Mecca and Medina because they are so late, which doesn't bother me because by the time they get introduced in the late 9th and 10th century. The first 7 are not chosen until 936. That's the 10th century. That's 300 years too late. And the next 14 are chosen by the 12th century. Again, that's 500 years too late. Then all the 30 are not chosen till the 15th century. By that time, it would make sense that you would have 8 down from Mecca and Medina. But the earliest ones are all from Kufa. And look at, Kufa predominates. Why does Kufa have so many? Why does it have 16 of the 30? Why is almost half of them come from just one city? The reason is because that's where the discussions were happening. That's where the debates were happening. That's where the Quran was being put together. Now can you see why? When you look at the evidence in our hands, it stands to reason that, again, another northern environment where this was all happening, it then took and then moved itself out. So this idea that the narratives have, that this all came from Uthman in Mecca and Medina, is hogwash, because the Quraish, as we're finding today, have nothing to do with Mecca Medina. They're probably from Iran. They're probably from the Persian area. It's the followers of Cyrus. So this idea of Quraish, there is no reference to any people called Quraish in the 7th century. That's why we need to follow a timeline. And when you follow the timeline, we can pretty well throw this out in one fell swoop.
Right. Now, I'm not aware of any books in particular that talk about all of these things. But if people want to go and take a glimpse at portions of these topics, because you guys are unpacking them in a strong way. So you have a book by Robert Spencer, Did Muhammad Exist, for instance. You have a book by another Robert Hoyland, Seeing Islam as Others Saw It or See It, I think. So these are the books that, Mill and Jay, myself, and others are referring to periodically. These are scholars, by the way, and all of these people. People can see.
There's so many books that are out there.
Exactly, but they don't unpack all of these issues. You guys are taking these issues and unpacking it for the audience, correct?
Absolutely.
Yes.
And that's why you need to go to the scholar. Look at these scholars. These are the top scholars in the field today. And they are linguists, most of them. Hoyland reads and writes 18 languages. Patricia Crone read and wrote before she died 15 languages. They're going back to the original documents. I have never seen one Muslim do what they're doing. Not one Muslim. That you would think the Muslims would want to know their own history. There has been no one that has gone back to these original documents. Did you notice the whole Qira'at argument? Why is it we only finding about the Qira'ats since June 8th of this year? Why is it no one knew about these qira'ats? We didn't know about these 30. We didn't know about the sequence. It's because a man named Shadi Nasser, who is really not a Muslim any longer, but he is a academic. You need the academics who are doing the research for us, but don't want to go public with it. They don't want to put their face and say this on television or certainly on YouTube. So we've got to do that. And that's why I want to thank Mel. I want to thank Bala. I want to thank Murad especially. And I want to thank Joe. And I want to thank, what's her name, Kay or Faye?
Faye.
Yeah. I want to thank this team that's putting it together and reading the material and coming out and coming to conclusions. Our job, Al-Fadi, you and me, is to get it out there so that people can communicate it, so people can actually see it and then come to terms with it.
Very good. Brian, no, you're asking where are the sources? Here's the answer. Watch the video. So.
Hi, Brian Nell. He's a good friend of mine from England.
Yeah. So, because Jay was lifting all these books in front of the camera, that will be the quickest way, quicker than Jay,
here,
by
I'll
the
just
way.
name them to you.
Quicker than way.
The Hidden Origins of Islam. If you want to go through them real quickly, The Hidden Origins of Islam.
Go ahead. Go ahead, please.
Heinz
Have the title in front of the camera a couple of times, yes?
Okay. The
There
Hidden Origins of
That's
Islam
one.
by Karl-Heinz Oleg and Gerd Quinn. You've got to read that. The Quran in its historical history. This is where that story comes from. Them dumping all
Dr.
the Qurans
Gabriel
into the Nile.
Said Reynolds, a scholar
From
in the
the head
field.
of department at Notre Dame University.
That's right.
Mark Dury. This is the one everybody should get. The Quran and its biblical replicas has only been out 2 years.
My beloved PhD supervisor.
And he is the one that actually takes what Jalad has taken, Al-Jalad, and has taken all this material and put it in layman's terminology. We can read it. Early Islam from Karl-Heinz Oleg's again. This one here, you can get it. All of these you can get on on Amazon.
That's
and
right.
then, of course, the Seeing Islam as Others Saw It. This is probably the mother lode. This is the one that is probably the best, because what he did, what no one else had done before him. He went to all the surrounding nations there in the 7th and 8th century, and he just wrote what they were saying, because they were actually, this history was hitting them. They were being impinged upon it. And what he found has almost in every case contradicts the Islamic narrative that we're finding in the 9th and 10th century. Now, let me just end with this guy. Robert Morey has done us a great favor in 2012. He dared ask the question that no one is permitted to ask. This is highly controversial. This is highly confrontational. When he asked this question, he was vilified. He was called a hate preacher. He was called an Islamophobe. He is not even today permitted to come to England. They won't let him come to England because of this kind of book. He was on Fander Films twice this summer. He was hearing all this new material that Mel and his team have come up with, and he says, I'm going to have to republish my book. He went to his publishers. His publisher says, rewrite the book immediately. He has now rewritten the book. I just gotten the first copy 3 weeks ago. He has now put 25% more material. And as he wrote it, I looked at it. He was the first to see it. I had to call him up and I said, you haven't kept up with the newest stuff. He's going to have to do a third printing, because there's so much new material that's coming to play. There's so much new information that we're now coming across that he's going to have to keep revising this book. But God bless him for starting this whole question in 2012. We're now in 2020. The new book's coming out. It's going to be out in a few months. I wish it could be out tomorrow. And then we're going to have to do another one and another one and another one. So in some ways, Robert Spencer is doing for us, putting together, writing down what we're saying on video. I'm getting lots of questions from lots of people saying, could you please put this in book form? Robert Spencer is doing that for us. Mel and I will put together, we will get a book out there. We will put it together. But again, we're going to have the problem. As soon as you publish it, it's out of date. Why? Because there's so much yet to be discovered.
That's right. That's right. So we want to close, everyone here, including you, Jay and Mel, with an appeal to people to become Patreon patrons, givers to your, respective channels. And we are going to put this appeal on screen. So for you, Mel, what is your channel called?
It's called Sneakers Corner.
And we want to really ask people to consider this kind of work, of course, because it's amazing. And I'm sure it costs a lot of time and money. And we're not getting rich out of this if people are thinking that. It just helps with the effort and the ministry. And everybody can see that on the screen. Jay, what is your channel? Assuming people are living under a rock and they don't know anything about you.
Well, for those who are living on the rock, don't know anything about me, my channel has been around since 2006. That's one of the oldest channels up there, and it's called Fander Films, and it has not stopped. Now, for 8 years, I had to go into hiatus because we lost the passport, or the team that was encountered it. So it is the channel that actually is taking on a lot of what Mel's finding. We're also looking at the Qira'ats. We're doing two things simultaneously, right? We're really hammering Muhammad, and we're hammering the Quran, the book of the man, the book of the man, the book of the man. And we're doing both of them historically. We're only looking at the sources from the 7th and 8th century. So that's, if you want to go to Fander Films, listen, we can't do what we're doing without your support. And I want to thank all those people who do support Mel. I want to thank those people who support CIRA International. These are the channels. There's only a few of us. There's only about 2 handfuls of us that are even exists. And we do get an awful lot of battering. We get an awful lot of hate mail. We're called Islamophobes. We have been shut down. We have been struck off. Some of us have been beaten up. I don't know if you saw, but Hatun got arrested yesterday. She was in prison overnight. And this is the things that we have to work with. This is the thing we have to deal with. I also want to highlight her channel, DCCI, Defending Christ, Confronting Islam. Hatun is probably the one that we really need to highlight on the Qira'at agenda. She is the one that started it. She was the one that took it forward back in 2016, and she is the one that has really pushed that whole narrative worldwide. So there's an awful lot happening, folks. This is 2020. Wait till next year. It's going to get better and better, and that's why you need to support us. You need to be behind us, but follow us and then move it and take it out and reproduce it in your own channels.
Exactly.
And make sure that the Muslims see it.
Exactly. And for us, of course, we started a campaign of trying to at least encourage 100 Patreon to join our Patreon team, or patrons, I should say. That was the last week of October this year when Jay was with us here. I'm pleased to say that we are down to 17 only. So hopefully the last 17 will be willing to join our team. Again, we're not giving you specific amounts. It could be as little as $1, by the way. But the idea is the more Patreon patrons we have, the more opportunities for the material to be spread around, of course. That's the ultimate goal. And, we thank you, of course, for your sacrifices and for your giving. And Mel, one last word.
I would say watch 2021. There's a lot to come yet. And one of the big areas for 2021 will be how the Quran got put together. So Odin and Joe have got some interesting narratives on that score, and we're going to try and get it out there. You're going to be amazed at what
I need to connect with them as soon as possible for my own research. so we'll be in touch. Well, folks, thank you so much. Dr. J, as always, it's a pleasure to have you, brother. Mel, I am honored to have had you here. And please, consider, doing a regular with us, of course, you and the team. But also, I want to do the entire series with you where we can do the full, basically, amount of evidence that you have uncovered for us. Everyone else, thank you so much for being here with us. I know this was a special live stream. It went longer than typical, but hey, I mean, we're getting a lot of views and everybody's tracking and no one is bored. So why not? It's always fun to have people watching. Hopefully we didn't put anybody to sleep. It doesn't look like it because the number of viewers went up, not down. So as always, thank you, everyone. God bless you. And until we meet again, I'm going to steer this line. This is Al Fadi, over and out. Take care.
Oh, that's my line.